Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll be kicking off the webinar in just a couple of minutes. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, The Modern CFO's Approach to T&E Management. I'm Heather Lohman, Senior Content Marketing Manager at TripActions, and I just want to make sure we cover a few housekeeping items with everyone before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. We will answer as many as we can get to at the end of the presentation, and you can always follow up with us after by emailing webinars@tripactions.com. You can feel free to join the conversation on social. You can tag us at TripActions and at Expensify. And for anyone who's wondering, we are recording the presentation today, and we will be sharing out the on-demand video to all attendees. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our presenters, Francis Moran, who's TripActions VP of Finance, and Garrett Knight, Expensify's Director of Sales.
All right. Thanks, Heather. Hi, folks. Thank you so much for joining us today. Garrett will be introducing himself shortly, but I'll kick things off. My name is Francis Moran, and I'm the VP of Finance here at TripActions. Really quickly, at TripActions, we've built an end-to-end modern business travel management platform that intelligently combines technology and people to deliver the best traveler experience while taking the noise and lack of transparency out of managing travel for finance teams and travel managers. A little bit about me and my background. I spent about 15 years or so in the finance profession, and I've held positions across accounting and finance at companies large and small. It really split my career into two, effectively pre and post MBA. Pre-MBA was focused heavily on the accounting and controllership side of the house, rounding out that part of my career with a 4-year stint at Morgan Stanley as their financial controller, overseeing their capital markets business, which generated about $3 billion a year in revenue, at least at the time. Post MBA and more recently, however, I focused on the finance and FP&A side of the house, thinking about efficient resource allocation first and foremost, but also critically on how to build the systems, processes, and teams that can really help companies scale and grow responsibly. I was the first finance hire at TripActions and was brought in to build a team. Since I joined 18 months ago or so, the company has grown from about 50 total employees to close to 600. My teams have grown from just me really to 20 across 3 different functions. So it's been a really interesting ride for us here. Immediately prior to joining TripActions, I was the director of FP&A at Lookout, who interestingly was an early TripActions customer. It was there that I first learned about TripActions and the travel solution that we were building. So I got hooked, and the rest is history. Garrett, on to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the intro, Francis. I'm Garrett Knight. I am the Director of Sales here at Expensify, and I've been with Expensify for just over 7 years and really almost every client-facing position known to man. So I know the ins and outs of onboarding support, and I've heard quite a few horror stories about expense reports. And so I'm pretty comfortable saying that I've spent more time focused on expense reports than about 99% of the global population. So look forward to any questions you guys have later. Maybe a little bit more about Expensify. And so Expensify is an expense management system that was originally created to make expense reports that don't suck. Obviously, the experience in the past has been pretty terrible, and that seems like a pretty low bar, but you'd be surprised at how terrible it's been for people along the way. And so through the years, Expensify has made expense reports that don't suck, and we've moved even beyond that towards really automating the entire process so that you don't have to do expenses, right? And so we do that by a combination of not only user-based design, but also machine learning and very tightly integrated apps and accounting systems that we work with, so that you don't have to be born to do expenses, even though I might have been born to do expenses. So maybe next, let's jump into just a little bit about how Expensify and TripActions are working together and kind of how that's come about. So we launched our partnership with TripActions in 2018. And as part of that, we launched an integration whereby you can book anything in TripActions with one touch, right? And then it automatically gets brought into Expensify. And so not only that, but we've worked together to enhance our reporting, bring over the information that is important to you. And that includes things like traveler name, booking ID, dates of travel, locations, projects, and all the good stuff that you need in your expense tool from your travel tool. And everyone's really loved it. The integration is actually a perk for travelers because it avoids duplication of their efforts, but really it's a huge leg up for travel and expense managers and reporting on their travel, whether that be who's going where and doing what, or more realistically, what's the total cost of the trip. And so this integration has been extremely successful. And following it, we actually saw 6 times more receipts coming over from TripActions. And so you'll see that we actually have 50% of the TripActions customers using Expensify. And so it's been an extremely, extremely powerful integration for those users. And I think you'll see that because we work with the likes of TripActions and also any of our accounting partners on the back end, we're finding that the back office with us combined has been incredibly streamlined. And so lastly, just a quick note, and I suppose chest bump on the fact that in the last year, TripActions has overtaken our most integrated travel partner. And we've been working with travel partners since the beginning, way back in 2008. And so in that case, that should wrap up kind of what we're working with on TripActions. But let's take a step back and zoom out a bit and look at what business travel more broadly looks like. So we actually just finished our 2019 spend trends report. And so we analyze all of our travel and expense data in order to glean some really interesting takeaways. And so one of the big things is that travel is king, and that 8 out of the top 10 most expensive brands are in travel. The only non-travel related merchants there are actually Home Depot and Starbucks. You might even be able to argue that Starbucks is a travel brand, considering how much you drink coffee on the go when you're traveling. But that shouldn't surprise you that this comprises about 10% of the total of company's budget under travel. And so it's huge when you think about it, because outside of payroll, it's consistently one of the biggest drivers of cost for the company. And as Francis will talk about it later, it can be a huge driver of revenue as well. And so streamlining the process and making smart decisions for travel has huge implications for your individuals and companies alike. Maybe another quick note in between these is that business travel and expenses happen in every company, whether they know it or not. And expenses, I ask people all the time, what do you use for your expenses? And they say, oh, I don't do expenses. I just keep all my receipts and send them to my company, and then they pay me back. And then I just have to let them know that that is doing their expenses, and that there's actually an easier way that they're just not aware of. I think similarly on the travel side, when you ask them what travel tool they use, they say, oh, we don't use a travel tool. We're not that complex. And the reality is, well, you book travel for work and you travel for work. The reason they think it's so complex is because most travel tools are complex and are painful. And so with those 50% of employees who do find the internal travel tool painful or complex, you'll see that they actually go rogue when booking travel. So they'll use a different travel platform than the one that they've been asked. And what both TripActions and Expensify are trying to do there is really change the narrative by being the best travel tools and the best expense tools, no matter how complex your company is. And so let's dig a little bit deeper on how employees go rogue and really what makes that difference. So as noted, 50% of bookings happen outside of policy and when employees go rogue because primarily outdated systems, but that's really not the whole story. So there's a workforce change happening right now that I'm sure you're all aware of. I myself am an entitled millennial. And so I'm really used to consumer tools and really consumer grade tools. And so if I'm going to use something and really want to use it, it needs to be better than what I'm used to in my personal life. And so taking a bit of a step back here, back in 2008, the App Store came out, and this is really what catalyzed this change because this unshackled employees from using the company's preferred and likely outdated systems and really allowed employees to choose their favorite travel and expense tools, among others, without the company choosing for them. And so we have basically tools that are building a mobile app to be employee-centric, and the employees are going to go use that whether they're told to or not. And now mobile apps are really just the tip of the iceberg here, but this is part of what has forced companies to seriously consider user experience when they're choosing tools, because if they don't, their employees will choose something else. And so even for those tools that have built kind of those apps for that changing workforce, there's still a really bad user experience in many cases. And so services where design is an afterthought and user experience is an afterthought really suffer. And so you can have what you'd consider a quote unquote modern system, but realistically, if it's not cutting edge, your employees are going to go elsewhere. So I think in those systems that employees don't book in, there is also a limited ability to do things in real time. So if you want to change your flight or update some information, or in the case of expenses, if you want to check where your expenses are at and get paid back fast, it really has to be in the app. Because if it's not, then you have to reach out to customer service. And then I think really the big point on that is the frustration with customer service doesn't really come from slow wait times or things like that primarily. It's the fact that they can't do it themselves. So these new apps that we're building in both TripActions and Expensify are really built to empower the employees and allow them to make changes themselves without necessarily dialing back to customer service. But if they need help, we're here to help them and here to help them quickly. So really just wrapping this up on the why employees go rogue side of things is that Expensify has built a business model off, frankly, employees going rogue. And so we actually allow people to use Expensify for free in their company to make sure that they have access to the best expense reporting software in the world. Now, as an individual, they actually submit up to their finance managers and their accountants and the people who make the decisions. So we actually used really a better app interface, a better customer service side of things to take advantage of this changing workforce and really build a better expense management system for all. And now I know TripActions has had a similar design philosophy, but they got there in a totally different way. Francis, do you want to walk through that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I think our philosophies are different, but sort of we landed at the decision through a roundabout way. I think Garrett touched on the fact that 50% of travelers who book travel go rogue, and it's very true that employees will go outside of the system to do the things that they want to do. But there are some enterprise systems that you simply can't get away from, right? If you want to get paid, you have to go into your HRIS system and put in your banking information. The same isn't true around travel and other tools, right? Not all tools in the enterprise are mandated. And when it came to travel, we realized early on that the traditional model for enforcing policy adherence involved, too much stick and not enough carrot, so to speak, and that this approach wasn't really working. The approach that we decided to take instead was to build a solution that obsessed over the traveler experience, while still giving admins and travel managers the tools /sticks they needed, but also reducing the noise and saving money for CFOs. The real critical piece here is obsessing over the traveler experience. And in travel and expense management, this means more than just building a pretty app, right? It has to go levels deeper than that. In travel specifically, it includes things like inventory availability, pricing, the ease of booking, the seamless integrations and expensing, travel reviews, and providing other important metadata that helps people make travel decisions. And critically, it also includes getting white glove customer support when you need it, right? And that's what we've built at TripActions. I think we have a winning formula, and our growth over the last 2 years suggests that our customers think so too. Over this period, we've grown to over 1,500 customers. We've expanded headcount by 15x while driving bookings and revenue growth by 16 and 19% respectively on a monthly compounded basis. That's monthly compounded rate. So we're talking about over 1,000% growth over that period of time. We see more and more CFOs and travel managers embracing a new way of managing travel, in a way that puts the traveler first without compromising control or financial stewardship of the company. I don't see this as a trade-off. I don't think that you have to give up control to put your travelers first. Not anymore, at least, and not with modern tools like TripActions. Daniel, would you like to touch a little bit on Expensify's growth and your trajectory as well?
Yeah, happy to. So I think I'll echo what Francis said around the fact that you need to make it easier for the employee, but that also shouldn't give up any control for the back office or the leadership. And so Expensify has really tried to build this into our products by making things happen in real time, i.e. you upload a receipt, we read it, we code it, we do everything for you. Where you would fail earlier doing that as an employee, we're doing it for you. So you get the control and also all the reporting on the back end that you would previously, but just with much less effort. And I think that's really resonated with all of our customers, 70,000 customers that we have across the globe in over 162 currencies. And so it's important to note that this is as many as all of our competitors combined, which is kind of crazy to think, but we've dominated the SMB and mid-market and are growing incredibly fast in the enterprise space, where more and more they're having to understand that user interface and really focus on usability is just table stakes these days. And so maybe the last note to make there is that we're still growing for our 10th year at 100% year over year. And so this is unheard of for a company our size. And I really chalk it up not only to our employees and our great service, but the fact that we just made an expense reporting system that's easy to use for people and that still maintains control for those finance managers and for those people on the backside of the office.
Cool.
Francis, you want to? Yep, all you.
Yeah, sure. So we're going to jump in shortly into how CFOs are tackling travel today. But before jumping into seeing that, let's start with understanding some of the broad trends taking shape. We published a report along with Skift recently highlighting some of the trends we're seeing in corporate travel. And I won't go through all of these, but I do encourage you to download the report and read it. I would like to call attention to the last item on the list here that speaks to CFO's increasing role in shaping culture, employee satisfaction, and engagement. Anecdotally, whenever I discuss this with my peers, they tend to agree and sort of nod in approval that CFOs need to take more ownership, over this issue. And that's the good news. The bad news is that I don't usually hear very good answers around how folks plan to address the challenge, including the employee corporate travel experience, which is an especially sensitive time because, often it involves people being away from home and getting stuck in undesirable places, and sometimes even paying out of pocket and having to wait to get reimbursed. So, over the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, I hope to share some ideas with you on how to manage your travel program in a way that drives value for you, for your business, but also includes how to drive employee and traveler happiness. So now let's get into how we see CFOs tackling travel today. There obviously isn't a consistent path for everyone, but I think we've distilled what we've seen into a framework that you can apply immediately to your teams. It's a framework that's really focused around, modern digital transformation. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about can be broadly applied to your entire finance organization, but I've tried here to really focus on how to apply this framework in reshaping how you manage travel. Now, the way I think about transformation involves 3 steps, which you could just easily remember as the 3 T's. It's really about transforming your technology, transforming your talent, and transforming your thinking. It's pretty simple, but the first thing to be on the lookout for is to not get anchored into thinking that this process is just about finding the best technology and then approaching it in a plug and play fashion. I mean, yes, there are solutions that can go and get you up and running in a matter of days or even hours, including, TripActions and Expensify. But to be truly successful and to really modernize how you do business, you really want to think about this a little bit more comprehensively. So let's start with understanding the technology. And transforming technology begins with really understanding the state of the art, and then architecting how this impacts how you do business and how to integrate things into your existing stack. Now, notice how I didn't start by suggesting that you kick this off with a long internal technical requirements gathering process. I think that a mistake that many CFOs make is to look at their current systems and processes, create a checklist of things that they think they need, and then go buy against that list. It creates a bit of tunnel vision and usually results in a buyer ending up in a situation that's very similar to where they started. Again, the critical step here is that, when transforming your technology, you need to first look outward. It's not about looking inward, right? So let's spend a few minutes sharing with you what the state of the art is in more modern corporate travel, so you can be informed about the potential applications and benefits for your own companies and employees, and more specifically, how it can shape your travel program. So let's start with machine learning and AI. Buzzwords, I'm sure, but there's some real meat to what's going on with each of these technologies within the context of travel. Machine learning is being deployed in a number of different ways in corporate travel, including predictive search, using heuristics, including your travelers' loyalty programs, their previous searches, their coworkers' recent activity, and real-time price analyses. A travel platform should be, at least a modern travel platform, should be able to predict your likelihood of booking a trip within the first 5 display results, as an example. Now, why is it important to be able to predict this, and how will it impact how you manage travel? Well, the obvious thing here as well, if time is money, and if we know that it's unlikely that you will book a trip, rather than having your employees waste time sifting through search results, we can deploy a support agent quickly to help the traveler find what they're looking for. A little bit more cynically also, as CFOs, you can also think twice about deploying more and more admins across your company to help, your exec and your management team book travel. The tool should do this for you, not your own employees. How does this translate into quantifiable results? Well, aside from the improved experience for your travelers, we also see average booking times of less than 10 minutes, which compares extremely favorably versus the status quo. Now, the same level of proactivity applies to resolving issues when you're on the road. And I don't mean simply giving you flight delay notifications. Yes, you should expect any modern travel solution to deliver flight delay alerts even before your airline notifies you. But the real magic happens when you're rebooked and you didn't even know this delay existed. This is what machine learning and proactive support can do for you. And you should also expect that type of thinking from your travel provider. Garrett, I know that Expensify leverages these technologies pretty heavily. Do you have any thoughts on how predictive technologies are impacting how folks are managing expenses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it actually aligns very well with kind of thinking of the travel of old in juxtaposition to kind of how TripActions is using your preferences, kind of your history, and really everything that we have at our fingertips to tell you probably what you're going to choose. And so In Expensify, we basically build profiles as people use the app and continue to populate different codings, projects, things like that. So they just don't have to, because the fact of the matter is that this is happening elsewhere when you use, again, those consumer tools. And the fact that you don't have it in your corporate system is going to be a real issue when it comes to choosing to continue to use your system. And so this machine learning and maybe more directly predictive search and rebooking and all that fun stuff is just extremely important, not only to save your employees time and pain, but also to get them back to doing what they're supposed to doing, which is really working in most cases. So definitely well aligned over here on the Expensify side.
Great. Next, let's talk about big data and APIs. The benefit of these two manifest themselves in two primary ways in travel today. First is in the quality of inventory that your employees see. And the second is what happens when you deploy learning algorithms on that inventory, so that your company can start making smart spending decisions when they book travel. Now, the quality benefit is about the recommendation engine that you can build, which leads to personalization and helps drive those really low booking times that I just mentioned. This trend towards individual traveler personalization, is hugely important and is going to change how business travel platforms present results, and you should really be aware of that trend. The second benefit of big data relates to learning algorithms and how they can influence your policy, your travel policy specifically. More specifically, by continuously running pricing algorithms on the available inventory, travel management platforms should be able to tell you what a fair market price should be for any given search in any location and really for any given type of travel. And having this data really unlocks some pretty creative stuff, which can shape how you build your policy. And we'll be getting into some of that stuff pretty shortly. Garrett, what's Expensify's take on using data and APIs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think obviously you saw our spend report, and I think that's one of the points that we want to make to our users, and both users who are new to Expensify, that you can kind of stand on the shoulders of giants here by using what other people have done before in order to inform your decision on how you put your policy together, really how streamlined you can make it and still be comfortable. And I think the big point of APIs there is not quite APIs for flight search on our side, but the fact that you're doing things in one app, and specifically one app that is extremely thoughtfully put together and uses big data to make choices like TripActions, means that when you API that over to Expensify, the decision's already made, all the work's already been done for you. And so instead of duplicating your efforts because there's big data on one side of the equation, you can actually use it on both sides of the equation. And that works for both travel providers for us, as well as any sort of HR system, any sort of accounting system that holds, frankly, a plethora of knowledge that can help them make better decisions.
Cool. So let's spend some time talking about talent and teams in the context of managing travel. This one's going to sound obvious, but you can't have the same people doing the same things and expect a different result. You really need to take a hard look and determine whether or not you need new talent or if you need to train the talent that you have to think a little differently. I don't want to knock on travel managers, but over 65% of them have been in the business for 10 or more years. This could be good or bad. And critically here, I'm not saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but you really need to think hard. And you need to make sure that the folks who you are charging with evaluating, implementing, and really maintaining the next generation of finance tools are next generation thinkers themselves. There's obviously lots of things that you need to evaluate and think about when interviewing folks on your team. But when I think about hiring for folks that sit on this, let's call it financial frontier, I really focus on some key attributes. One of those key attributes is a comfort with ambiguity. This trait is pretty hard to suss out during the interview process, but one of the things that I like to do with my FP&A candidates is to give them a financial modeling exercise with lots of superfluous variables and also intentionally omit some really critical ones, and then just see what happens, see what they do with it. Someone who is comfortable with ambiguity will first and foremost identify the deficiency, strike up a conversation about that gap, and then incorporate new data into a revised recommendation. The second thing that I look for is sort of a relentless sort of obsession with self-improvement. This one has some pretty obvious benefits. One of them being sort of a waterfall or a spillover effect into, folks wanting to improve their team, the folks around them, and just processes at large. The third thing that I look for is this perspective, this view that sees setbacks as learning opportunities. When you're on this frontier, when you're trying new things, you're going to fail a lot. You're going to get a lot of no's, and you need folks on your team that see those no's as like motivational fuel, as opposed to detractors from pushing on and persevering. And finally, the last thing that I look for is folks that are metrics and results driven. At the end of the day, we've got deadlines that we need to hit, and you can't have the first three without establishing some guardrails and really driving toward deliverables and results. So this last one is critically important when thinking about building, organizing, and hiring the next generation of finance talent. Garrett, how do you think about talent in the context of managing an expense program?
Yeah, I think every one of these points fits very squarely inside of what we're looking for in people as well. I think one of the biggest things that these all roll up into is really people who are looking for value multiplication. So when they are looking to better themselves, they're actually looking to better beyond themselves, whether that be themselves in a specific process they're working on, maybe even more of a wider process or team-wide process they're working on, then also honestly kind of at the highest level, which is focusing on every person in the company. And so all these are great kind of benchmarks for that. And I think they drive towards really thinking outside of the box when it comes to what can we make better? How many times can I fail to find the right thing? And how can I not stop and be relentless until we find the right experience, whether that be on the expense reporting side or even internally to us and our processes, making everybody's lives better. And so that maybe doesn't tie up perfectly with finance or perfectly with travel, but I think these are kind of maxims that I'm sure everybody on the webinar can agree that you should aspire to live by.
Great, thanks, Garrett. The last item to transform using the 3T framework is your thinking. More practically, this is about your internal policies, your processes, and the culture that you build. If you aren't, you should really be thinking about travel as a revenue and productivity driver. At least from my perspective, my goal with travel isn't about reducing travel. It's really about eliminating unnecessary travel spend. There's a distinct difference between the two. It's not easy, but the key to accomplishing this is to make sure that your employees are motivated to make smart decisions and are also empowered to do so. Now, I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but this framework is somewhat iterative, right? And the reason for this is because of a dependency on technology. Now, think about how big data machine learning capabilities we spoke about earlier can drive and deliver real-time pricing updates. This tech really enables us to essentially create a new policy every second, which is tailored to your travelers, their preferences, and the needs of the company. You no longer really need travel managers obsessing over, a 35-page policy that accounts for or takes into account, every single event or every city. It's just a level of complication that's no longer needed with the technology that we have at our fingertips. Another interesting policy item to discuss is how to align the interests of your employees with that of your company through policy and culture. Many CFOs don't think about culture as something that they manage or control, But that mindset is starting to change. Certainly, at the very minimum, the CFO is responsible for what I'd call a microculture of how the company spends its money. And that speaks to one of the challenges that we face as finance leaders. It's an asymmetry of information when making resource allocation decisions. This manifests itself in a number of different ways, including corporate travel. The typical question that's hard to answer is, is spending that extra couple $100 on that seat upgrade or a better hotel really a smart business decision? Or an even better example is, whether or not this trip is even necessary, right? Historically, there hasn't really been a good way of managing this process or this problem really outside of placing spend caps and approval workflows for exceptions. But what's really needed is a way to get employees to put some skin in the game so that you can mobilize them to start making smart decisions about travel that aligns their financial interests with that of the companies. And again, sort of like the first two T's are setting us up for the third, because technology has really enabled us to do that, to really align interests. By deploying pricing algorithms on data and machine learning on traveler preferences, we can now think about employees and rewards by sharing in the savings they generate for the company. I'm going to repeat that and be a little bit more blunt about it. That means that I'm advocating for no hard spend caps and for paying your employees for booking cheaper travel. I know that sounds unorthodox. It certainly did the first time I heard it. But we see that deploying rewards, a significant travel policy shift, really saves companies a significant amount of money on their travel spend. This requires a shift in how you think about policies, and it's just a part of it, but it's a shift that really yields some pretty significant benefits. And that's how to start or to get started thinking about transforming and modernizing your approach to managing travel. It's really a simple formula that starts by focusing on your traveler, then incorporating a shift in thinking about policy that leans on the right technology and a forward-thinking team. I really believe that TripActions and Expensify sit at the center of this, and we're both extremely proud of what we've built so far and are really excited to help you take the next step in transforming how you operate. That concludes my prepared remarks so far. I think we'll transition now to Heather so that she can moderate the Q&A portion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Francis and Garrett. We will go ahead and take some time for questions now. And just a reminder that you can go ahead and type your questions into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. Let's start with this one. How do you balance the need for immediate travel cost reduction with employee empowerment or trusting that they'll do the most cost-effective thing?
That's a good question. I'll start by saying that I'm going to challenge the premise of the question by saying that you don't really, I don't see them as being mutually exclusive, right? I don't think that you need to give up control to get your employees to make smart decisions or to spend less money or the other way around. I think you can have your cake and eat it too. I think you can give up control while driving the right types of behavior by leveraging some of the tools and tips and techniques that I spoke about earlier. It's really about aligning the interests of the employees with that of the company and getting them to put some skin in the game. You really need to get folks to think about the things that they're about to spend money on, and it starts by setting an example at the top. I'll give you an example of one of the things that's in our policy that really gets employees thinking about decision making in terms of outcomes. And the specific thing on our policy is that execs don't travel business just because they're an exec. Business travel kicks in when there's a specific business need, and that business need might be the frequency of travel that you do over any given period of time. And that means that you can travel business if you're an engineer or you're an exec. The point here, or the critical point here, is that you're thinking about decision making in the context of driving specific business outcomes. And once you start thinking about things that way, you start communicating that to your employees through your policies, through how you reward people, through the things that you message. I think you sort of benefit on both ends of the spectrum. Not sure if you have any additional comments or perspective on that, Garrett.
I think this one's all you, Francis, and I think you nailed it. So I'll bow out as need be.
All right. Well, now we've got a question, I think, for you, Garrett. What does real-time expense reporting actually mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you think about expense reporting of old, it was really collect all your receipts, put them in your wallet, bring home your really, really fat wallet full of receipts and tape them all onto a piece of paper, sometimes weeks later, and then walk it over to your travel manager or your expense manager. And so Expensify really tries to espouse making all those things happen in real time in one of two ways. So one way is automating it. There are technologies that you can leverage like OCR, like APIs and big data that can pull in information from separate sources without you needing to do anything. And so you can now with Expensify snap a picture of the receipt, put the app away, and we're going to automate reading that receipt, creating that expense, adding it to a report, coding that receipt. And if it's actually in policy, we'll even submit it for you. And so a big part of this and making expenses real time is so that you can focus on them at the time of sale or at the time that you actually need to focus on them, and then just forget about it because we'll take care of the rest. And now the other side of this is actually what we call intelligent interaction. And so this means that should you need to do something in Expensify, or should we need you to do something because we need a piece of information, we want to reach out in real time at a relevant point. So for instance, we have what we call our inbox in Expensify. And so if you got Expensify on the mind and you want to jump in there and make some changes, we're going to tell you exactly what you need to do to get your expenses in the right shape so that we can take care of them for you. And then you can just leave the app. It's actually kind of a weird thing, but I would actually prefer people spend no time in the Expensify app and keep us so bottom of mind that they're just like, oh no, I don't have expenses, I use Expensify. And then maybe the last point to make there is that should we need any information from you, it isn't weeks later after you've forgotten what the project or the client was. We're actually going to use real-time notifications in our app to let you know, hey, we actually need to know what customer that expense was. We don't have that information, so you can just tap it and go. So the goal of real-time expense reporting is actually just to get rid of expense reporting, and we're pretty far along there. So for anybody that's listening that hasn't used Expensify, or even those who have, if you're interested in anything real-time expense reporting, anything that I just mentioned, we'll be sending out some stuff later to get in touch, but there are a ton of components to it. All we want to do is make it as easy as possible.
All right, great.
And Francis, oh, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Just time for a few more questions. There's this one here. So both TripActions and Expensify have experienced extremely aggressive growth. What advice would you provide a young business seeking to follow a similar trajectory? And what do you know now that you wish you would have known earlier? Why don't we start with Francis?
I don't know where to start with this one. Build an awesome product and obsess over your customers, I think is lesson number one. But assuming that you've got that, the thing that I wish I had known earlier was, or that I had done earlier, was to hire quicker and hire sooner. I think CFOs in general tend to be pretty thrifty. We like to, depending on the role and depending on the part of the business, we like to invest after revenue, right? Especially when you're talking about the G&A function. Critically, though, when you're scaling, you have to identify the inflection points and the points at which you can break as an organization, and really invest in those things early. For us, it was specifically to think about building employee growth and employee infrastructure, and also to build the revenue side of the house very early on so that we could account for customer growth. So one of my first hires here was actually a revenue operations lead, so that we would have the infrastructure in place to connect Salesforce with our ERP, have good contract management processes in place, have automated invoicing, revenue recognition, cash receipts and reconciliation in place. Because once you get that influx of customers, it is very difficult to go back and fix this stuff when you're already behind the curve. So I think critically for me it was two things: identify the things that can break you, and if your top line is growing, make sure you take care of revenue first.
All right. And then Garrett, one more question for you on the Expensify side here. What drove your change from a more hands-on customer service method to a completely online blog/chat-driven customer service method? And are there any tips you have for companies that are having a hard time with this transition?
Oh, good question. So actually, I don't necessarily think we've driven away from the more hands-on customer service method. We've changed the way that we do it because we actually have more information at our fingertips via chat. So whereby maybe if we were to go the straight phone call-in line, you'd call in, you'd wait, you'd tell us your problem, you'd wait, and then we would tell you that we have to get back to you because we have to go look it up. But realistically, we've deployed chat as our primary method of support because it allows us to, in real time, access all information associated with questions there. So that we can, number one, tell you, hey, listen, this is an easy one and I can answer it right now. Or number two, say, hey, listen, this is going to take a couple minutes for me to look into and I'll get back to you in a bit. Now, for those companies or individuals that are having trouble with this transition, I think one of the biggest points that we made throughout it was that we wanted to kind of lift the veil on all the information that we had access to. And so as part of this, we've built out a really robust community, really robust documentation around not only just training, but troubleshooting. And we also have a number of standardized training webinars throughout every week. And so what we've tried to do is really build more of a spectrum of, hey, you want help here, you want training here, we have that for you. And so my best guess for you would be when you reach out to Expensify, if you're looking for something in particular and you need some help, we're going to direct you to the correct support methodology in order to make sure that you get the information so you can do it yourself with support from us.
Okay, great. And then one last question I just want to make sure we address before we wrap up here. Someone asking, how do I sign up / what's the process to become a customer?
Garrett, you want to take that one?
I'll take the first swing at that one. So with Expensify, we're actually going to follow up with everybody who attended here. So don't worry, you'll still have a chance to reach out to us. Should you like to use Expensify, it's actually free to sign up and use as well. You can just go straight to www.expensify.com and sign up. Or if you actually want to reach out to us and you have a couple more questions, just reach out to sales@expensify.com. And if you forget that, we're going to reach out to you anyway. Francis, any notes on how to get in touch with TripActions?
Yeah, I can just go ahead and answer that one. We will also be following up with everyone after the webinar. And if you're interested, you can go to our website, TripActions.com, and sign up for a demo there as well. And a salesperson will get in touch with you that way as well. All right, we are unfortunately out of time now, but anyone whose question was not answered, we will follow up with after the webcast. And keep an eye on your inbox for the recording if you would like to revisit the content as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We really, really appreciate you being here, and we will see you next time. Thank you.